There are days when you come home and the only thing you want to do is turn everything off. Not because you hate people, not because you're antisocial, but because your brain has reached its limit. You've talked, you've listened, you've reacted, you've smiled when you didn't feel like smiling, and now even the sound of another message feels heavy. So you start wondering, why am I like this? Why can everyone else handle it except me? What if the problem isn't who you are, but how much your mind has been forced to endure? If this feels familiar, consider subscribing, not for more noise, but for clarity. And if this describes your experience, leave a like or a comment. You might realize you're not as alone as you think.
Every day starts the same way. You wake up already slightly tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because your mind never fully shut down. Before your feet touch the floor, your phone lights up. Messages, notifications, group chats. Someone needs an answer. Someone expects a reaction. You tell yourself, it's fine, this is normal. On the way to work or school, you prepare your face, not consciously, but instinctively. A neutral expression, a polite tone, a version of you that fits the day. Then it begins. Meetings where everyone talks, but no one really listens. Conversations where you're expected to respond quickly, not truthfully, just promptly. Background noise that never stops. Keyboards, voices, alerts, footsteps, screens. Even silence isn't quiet anymore. Silence just means waiting for the next interruption. You nod, you smile, you participate. Not because you want to, but because not participating would require explaining yourself, and explaining yourself feels even more exhausting. So you stay on, hour after hour. You reply to messages you don't care about. You sit through discussions that drain you but demand your presence. You absorb opinions, moods, expectations, none of which belong to you. By the time the day ends, your body is still functioning, but something inside you feels hollow, like a battery that looks full until you unplug it and realize it has nothing left. You go home, and this is where the confusion begins. Because nothing terrible happened, no argument, no trauma, no obvious reason to feel this way. Yet the moment you close the door behind you, the weight hits. Your shoulders drop. Your breath becomes shallow. Your tolerance disappears. A simple question from someone you love feels like pressure. A harmless message feels intrusive. Even friendly voices feel loud. You don't want to talk. You don't want to explain. You don't even want to think. You just want quiet. But instead of relief, guilt arrives. Why am I so sensitive? Why can't I handle normal life? Why do I need space when everyone else seems fine? You start comparing yourself to others. They go to work all day and still want to socialize. They attend meetings and then go out at night. They reply instantly, laugh easily, stay available. And you? You cancel plans. You delay replies. You sit in silence and still feel overwhelmed. So you label yourself introvert, antisocial, bad at relationships, emotionally distant, sometimes worse, weak, broken, difficult. And because you don't want to be any of those things, you push yourself harder. You force conversations when you're empty. You stay present when you're already gone. You give energy you don't have, on credit. And the cost compounds. The more you push, the faster you drain. The faster you drain, the more you withdraw. The more you withdraw, the more guilt you feel. It becomes a quiet cycle, invisible to everyone else. From the outside, you're functioning, responsible, polite, reliable. From the inside, you're constantly one interaction away from overload. What hurts the most isn't the exhaustion itself. It's not knowing why. Because when you don't understand the cause, you assume the cause is you. You start believing there's something fundamentally wrong with your personality, that you're not built for this world, that you're failing at something everyone else learned naturally. So you try to adapt. You watch how others behave and imitate them. You learn when to speak, when to react, when to laugh. You perform social competence, even when it costs you. And the cruel irony? The better you become at appearing normal, the more invisible your exhaustion becomes. No one sees the drain. No one sees the effort. No one sees how much it takes just to stay engaged. They only see the result. So when you finally pull away, when you go quiet, cancel plans, or stop responding, they don't see a system overloaded. They see rejection, disinterest, coldness, and that misunderstanding cuts deep. Because you don't hate people, you don't hate connection, you just hate how much it costs and how little room you're given to recover. This is the core conflict, not a hatred of society, not a flaw in your character, but a constant invisible drain, happening in a world that never stops stimulating you. And until you understand that, you'll keep fighting yourself instead of the real problem.
At first, you don't notice the breakdown. It doesn't arrive as panic. It doesn't announce itself with tears or anger. It arrives quietly, as a thought you keep having more often than you'd like. Something is wrong with me. You start questioning reactions that once felt natural. Why does a simple message feel heavy? Why does a phone call drain you before it even begins? Why does being around people you care about still make you want to escape? You don't say these things out loud. You keep them inside, where they slowly turn against you. You tell yourself you're being dramatic, that others are dealing with more and complaining less, that you should be grateful, not exhausted. So you override your signals. You answer when you don't want to. You show up when your body is asking for rest. You stay in conversations long after your attention has collapsed. And each time you do, something subtle breaks. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Your patience shortens. Your empathy thins. Your tolerance for noise, emotion, and unpredictability drops. You become more irritable, then feel guilty for it. More distant, then ashamed of it. You start apologizing for your limits. Sorry, I'm just tired. Sorry, I'm not feeling very social. Sorry, I need some time. And eventually, even those apologies feel like too much. So you stop explaining. You withdraw without words. You disappear for hours, sometimes days. You leave messages unread, not because you don't care, but because you don't have the capacity to respond. This is where the inner conflict sharpens, because withdrawal brings relief, but it also brings fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being labeled cold or distant, fear of losing connection altogether. So you oscillate. You isolate to survive, then you reconnect to prove you're still normal, then you collapse again. Each cycle makes the next one harder. And in the absence of a clear explanation, your mind fills the gap with judgment. If I were stronger, this wouldn't happen. If I were more confident, I'd enjoy people more. If I were better, I wouldn't need so much space. You begin to envy those who seem endlessly available. People who can talk for hours without fatigue. People who thrive in crowds. People who gain energy from interaction. You assume they possess something you lack. What you don't see is what they're losing, or how differently their nervous systems process stimulation. Instead, you internalize the difference as deficiency. And this is the most damaging part of the breakdown. Not the exhaustion itself, but the belief that your exhaustion is a personal failure. At some point, the question changes. It's no longer, why am I tired? It becomes, why can't I be like everyone else? That question quietly reshapes your identity. You stop trusting your own limits. You stop listening to your own signals. You start measuring your worth by how much you can endure. And endurance becomes your standard. Not well-being, not clarity, not peace, just endurance. You survive your days, you push through conversations, you perform connection without feeling it. And when you finally reach your limit, when you snap, shut down, or disappear completely, you don't see it as a warning, you see it as proof. Proof that you're broken, proof that you can't handle life, proof that you don't belong in a world this loud. This is the moment many people get stuck in, trapped between needing connection and being destroyed by too much of it. And without understanding what's actually happening inside your mind, you keep blaming yourself for a system that was never designed to protect you.
Here's the shift most people never make. They assume exhaustion comes from who they are, their personality, their confidence, their social skills. But in reality, exhaustion comes from what they're exposed to. Not all fatigue is emotional. Not all withdrawal is psychological. Much of it is neurological. Your brain is not an abstract idea. It's a biological system with limits. Limits that modern life ignores completely. For most of human history, stimulation was intermittent. Conversation happened in small groups. Silence was common. Solitude was built into daily life. Your nervous system evolved for that world, not for endless notifications, not for constant social feedback, not for environments where you're expected to be reachable at all times. This is where the misunderstanding begins. We use words like introversion and extroversion as if they explain everything. They don't. Introversion describes how you recharge, not how much stimulation you can tolerate before breaking down. Two people can both be introverted and have completely different thresholds. Two people can both be extroverted and still become overstimulated. The real variable is stimulus load. How many inputs your brain is processing at once. Sound, faces, expectations, emotional cues, decisions, micro-responses. Each one costs energy. Individually, they seem harmless. Collectively, they overwhelm the system. Think of your mind like a processor. Every conversation is a background app. Every message is a notification. Every social expectation is a task running silently. You can't see them, but they're consuming resources. Eventually, the system slows down. Focus drops. Tolerance shrinks. Irritation rises. And when the processor overheats, it doesn't explode. It shuts things down. This is what withdrawal really is. Not avoidance, not rejection, a protective shutdown. Your brain isn't saying, "I hate people." It's saying, "I can't process any more input right now." But because we don't talk about stimulus management, we misinterpret the signal. We call it weakness. We call it social behavior. We call it emotional immaturity. In reality, it's a nervous system hitting its capacity. Here's a critical distinction. Energy is not lost equally. Some activities drain your body, some drain your emotions, and some drain your attention. Social interaction, especially modern social interaction, drains attention relentlessly. You're not just talking, you're monitoring tone, reading expressions, adjusting responses, predicting reactions, managing impressions. Your mind is multitasking constantly. And unlike physical fatigue, attention fatigue doesn't announce itself clearly. It disguises itself as irritability, brain fog, loss of motivation, desire to escape, which is why people miss it. They rest physically, but stay stimulated. They sleep, but wake up tired. They take breaks, but fill them with screens. The stimulus never stops, so recovery never begins. This is why being alone doesn't always help. If your solitude is filled with noise, content, messages, or information, your brain is still working, still processing, still reacting. Real recovery requires a drop in input, not entertainment, not distraction, reduction. This is what stimulus management actually means. Not isolating yourself from the world, but regulating how much of it reaches you.
And here's the most important part. There is nothing wrong with needing that regulation. You are not defective because your system overloads. A computer that overheats under extreme load isn't broken. It's responding exactly as designed. The problem isn't the processor. The problem is the workload and the lack of cooling. Once you understand this, something fundamental changes. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and you start asking, "What am I exposing my mind to and for how long?" That question leads to solutions. But before solutions, there's one more shift you need to make, because even when people understand overload, they still blame themselves, not consciously, but emotionally. Which brings us to the next part.
Once you see stimulus overload for what it is, the story you've been telling yourself begins to collapse. Not all at once, but enough to create space. Because if exhaustion is a response, not a flaw, then the problem isn't your character, it's the environment you're trying to survive in. Modern life is built on a silent expectation, availability. You're expected to respond quickly, to stay reachable, to be socially present even when you're mentally absent. Silence now needs justification. Delays require apologies. Boundaries are mistaken for disinterest. This system rewards those who can stay on the longest, not those who function the best. And when you struggle inside it, you assume the failure is personal. But consider this. We've created a world where input never stops, then shame people who need time to process it. We glorify productivity while ignoring recovery. We praise communication while erasing quiet. And we call it strength to override your limits. But overriding your limits doesn't make them disappear. It just makes the crash harder. Here's the sentence that changes everything. You are not weak. You are overstimulated. And overstimulation is not a moral failure. It's a mechanical one. A nervous system pushed beyond its sustainable load will always react the same way, not because it's fragile, but because it's human. When you stop framing your exhaustion as a personal defect, guilt begins to loosen its grip. You realize you don't need to become louder, faster, or more available. You need a different relationship with input. This reframe is uncomfortable at first, because it means letting go of the idea that enduring more makes you better. It means accepting that limits are not obstacles, they're information. And information is only useful if you listen to it. The people who last the longest in demanding environments are not the ones with endless energy. They're the ones who know when to step away. They know when to turn things off before the system shuts itself down. This isn't withdrawal, it's maintenance. And maintenance is not selfish, it's responsible. Once you internalize that, you stop fighting your need for space. You stop apologizing for recovery. You stop interpreting silence as failure. Instead, you begin to ask a different question. How do I protect my energy without disconnecting from the world entirely? That question leads us out of theory and into practice, because understanding overload changes nothing if you don't change how you respond to it. So now we move to what actually works, not vague advice, not personality labels, but concrete exits built into your day. Understanding overload is important, but understanding alone won't save you. Insight without structure still leads to burnout. What changes everything is building exit doors, small intentional breaks that interrupt the drain before it becomes collapse. Not escape, not isolation, controlled reduction. There are two exits that work consistently because they respect how the nervous system actually recovers. Exit door 1. 10 minutes of silence before connection. This sounds insignificant. 10 minutes feels too short to matter, which is exactly why most people skip it. But those 10 minutes act like a pressure valve.
after work, after school, after meetings, after prolonged social exposure, before you speak, before you explain, before you respond. You stop. No phone, no conversation, no information. Not meditation, not productivity, just silence. Your brain needs a transition, a buffer between stimulation and interaction. Without it, you carry the entire day into the next conversation. That's when small questions feel heavy. That's when loved ones feel demanding. That's when irritation appears out of nowhere. Those 10 minutes are not about relaxation. They're about resetting the processing queue, letting inputs finish processing instead of stacking on top of each other. This is why people say, "I don't want to talk right now," but can't explain why. The explanation is simple. Your system hasn't caught up yet. 10 minutes gives it space to do that. And here's the important rule. You don't justify it. You don't apologize for it. You don't negotiate it. You treat it like a physiological requirement because that's what it is. Exit door 2. One non-negotiable no-contact window daily. This is where most people resist because it sounds extreme. One full window each day where you are not socially available. No messages, no calls, no meetings, no conversations. Not even just a quick reply. This window doesn't isolate you from life. It restores your ability to engage with it. Think of it like charging a device while it's turned off. If the screen is still on, charging is inefficient. The same is true for your mind. Partial availability is still availability, and availability still drains attention. This window doesn't have to be long, 30 minutes, an hour. What matters is its clarity. Your nervous system recovers best when it knows it is truly off duty. This is especially important for people who are emotionally attentive, people who feel responsible for others' reactions, people who read between lines. For them, even passive presence costs energy. This window gives your system a guarantee. Nothing will be required of you right now. And that guarantee changes everything. Applying this without damaging relationships. The fear isn't about silence. The fear is about being misunderstood. So you communicate once clearly, not every time, once. You explain that this isn't withdrawal, it's regulation, that this space allows you to show up better, not less. Healthy people adapt. Unhealthy systems demand constant access. This distinction matters. When you protect these exits, something subtle happens. You stop collapsing at night. You stop snapping unexpectedly. You stop disappearing without explanation. Because you're no longer forcing endurance, you're managing load. And when load is managed, connection becomes possible again. Not forced, not resentful, but intentional. Which brings us to the final shift. Because the goal was never to escape the world. The goal was to stay in it without losing yourself. The goal was never to disappear. You don't need to withdraw from society. You don't need to become unreachable. You don't need to choose between solitude and connection. That choice is false. What you need is control over timing. Because energy isn't destroyed by interaction itself. It's destroyed by interaction without recovery. When you know you have space later, you can be present now. When your nervous system trusts that silence is coming, it stops panicking during stimulation. This is the difference between people who burn out and people who last. They don't endure more, they recover better. They understand that connection is a rhythm, not a constant state. Engage, withdraw, recharge, return. This rhythm is natural. Nature works this way. Breathing works this way. Muscles work this way. Only modern life demands permanence. Once you respect this rhythm, your relationships change. You listen better because you're not overwhelmed. You respond more honestly because you're not depleted. You stay longer because you're not forcing yourself. People feel the difference, not because you explain it, but because your presence is stable. And most importantly, you stop treating rest as something you earn after exhaustion. You treat it as something you schedule before collapse. This is what real self-respect looks like. Not pushing harder, not proving toughness, but designing your life around how your system actually functions. You're not here to win endurance contests. You're here to stay whole in a world that constantly asks for pieces of you. And when you do that, when you stop fighting your need for quiet, something unexpected happens. Connection stops feeling dangerous. If any part of this felt familiar, there's a reason. You're not alone in this experience. You're just rarely given language for it. Most people don't burn out because they hate connection. They burn out because they never get to recover from it. So before you label yourself as distant, cold, or difficult, ask a different question. Not what's wrong with me, but what drains me the fastest. Is it meetings where you have to stay alert for hours? Is it social gatherings where you perform more than you participate? Is it group chats that never really end? Pay attention, because the moment you identify the drain, you regain control. So I want to ask you something, and take a moment before you answer. When do you feel your energy drop the fastest? After meetings? After parties? After constant messaging? Write it down. Name it, because awareness is the first boundary. And boundaries are not walls, they're doors that let you decide when to open and when to rest. You're not rejecting the world, you're learning how to stay in it without losing yourself.